Hi, so my name is Vicki Mountford. I'm a clinical psychologist and I work with people with eating disorders. And what I'm going to be doing today is talking kind of specifically about body image and eating disorders, thinking a little bit about what does it mean, what are we talking about when we think about body image, and also to give you an idea of how that might be treated, what kind of ideas we have about that, and how we actually do that in practice. I want to also touch a little bit on positive self-esteem in regard to the body. So obviously today I'm going to be talking about negative body image, but actually what's it like at the other end of the spectrum for people who feel good about their bodies? How does that show itself? And what could we learn from that? I'm also going to touch a little bit about what we can all do in our everyday lives to try and improve our body esteem. And then, as I said, at the end, I've got time for questions and discussion. So, we all have lots of thoughts about our bodies, and these start from a very young age, whether they're messages from our family, from peers as we get a little bit older, things that we see on the TV or in magazines, thoughts that we have about ourselves, thinking about the things that we choose to eat and drink. These messages come from everywhere. And within all of us, there's going to be variation between how satisfied we feel with our bodies, and on different days, how satisfied we feel about our bodies. So our body image can really change, and it might even change minute to minute, hour to hour. There's lots of things that can change. And we have lots of current influences about our body image, but also lots of messages that we've picked up from the past. And those messages may be very explicit, like some of the ones that were described in the inspirational talks earlier, or they can be a lot more subtle, things that we pick up about how appearance is valued or how it's important to look a certain way to be accepted in our society. Those messages happen to us all the time. And these are some of the things that we might get. So you look so pretty today, or she'd look much better if she just lost some weight. I need to go on a diet, look at my thighs. And then some of those assumptions that are out there that are really toxic, like overweight people have no willpower. Again, talking about some of the talks that we heard earlier, I look awful. I'm sure everyone is looking at me, laughing at me. So I'm giving this talk on body image today, but I think what's important to say is that body image can be hard to understand. It can be hard for lay people, it can be hard for clinicians. It certainly can be hard to understand if you've got a family member who sees something so different from what you see. So why is the individual insisting that they are fat when they're clearly underweight? What's happened to the brain? How do we try and understand that? And there are some gaps in our knowledge. So we actually know that, particularly among women in Western world, lots of us see ourselves as a bit bigger than we are. But actually, why does that get so distorted in someone with an eating disorder? And how do we treat that effectively? I think, one of the worries that people really have is that my body image won't change, it won't get better. And why is it important that we think about negative body image and that we address this? Lots of different reasons, but maybe one of the most important is that it causes significant distress to the individual who experiences that negative body image. Often, I think one of the things that really brings people to treatment is how bad they feel about their bodies, that it's on their minds every single moment of the day. Again, as people said earlier, that it might stop them going out. It might mean that they can't study or concentrate properly because they're constantly preoccupied with thoughts about their eating, thoughts about their shape, thoughts about their weight, thoughts about not being good enough. Unfortunately, it is one of the slowest aspects of having an eating disorder to change. And I'm often very upfront with people and let them know that, because they have to do a lot of difficult work before that. And even then, body image takes a long time to change. And sometimes people do a bit of the work and they think this is really hard and it doesn't seem to be changing. The professionals have got it wrong. How am I going to feel better about my body? I just can't imagine that happening. But with people that I've worked with, I have seen it change. It does improve, but it just takes a long time. It is also a negative prognostic factor for recovery. So if someone at the end of their treatment or during their treatment is still having lots and lots of negative body concerns, that's going to make it harder for them to hold on to recovery or to get to recovery. And so if that is still in place at the end of treatment, that does increase the likelihood of relapse. So it's really important that we help people to feel better about their bodies. And as I said, that's not going to happen straight away, but we need to give people the skills and the tools to work towards getting there. Okay, so what are we talking about? What is body image? When I put it really simply, I say it's the relationship we have with our bodies. Because even though it feels like a fact, it's actually our beliefs and our opinions, and it is changeable. So it's our attitude towards our body and our perception of it. And as I said, those attitudes are gathered throughout our lives. They're influenced by others. Now, we can have a bit of a think about what our attitudes are towards our body by thinking about the way we talk about our bodies. How do we treat our bodies? Do we nourish our bodies? Do we treat them in a good way? Or are we more critical, disparaging, don't look after ourselves? And how we interact with others. And again, you'll have seen from the Mean Girls clip earlier, and any kind of conversation you have with people who are preoccupied with their bodies, about how much that comes to the fore and how easily that kind of critical self-talk comes out. And it's multifaceted. And what I mean by that is that there are all these different areas to body image. And I think that's partly what makes it so difficult to treat. So first of all, we have kind of the perceptual, the physical side of things. So that's what we see when we look at our bodies, including the errors that we make when we look at our bodies, such as the very common error of seeing ourselves as bigger than we are. In eating disorders, that's particularly impacted by a lot of the physical sensations that are happening in our body as a result of starvation or starting to eat again. So we often get a lot of a physical focus around our stomach. We can feel things, we might experience bloating, and that adds to the sense of feeling that my body isn't right. It's also our cognitive appraisal. So what do we think when we think about our bodies? What are our judgments about our bodies? It's our emotions, so how do we feel about our body? And for some people that might be things such as disgust or shame. And also our behaviours, so what we do when we look at our body and what we do that maintains our body image. And these four factors fit together and kind of get in this loop and constantly reinforce each other. So this is an example here from someone who her emotions are feeling really anxious about the loss of control over my body, worried about how others will see my body, and depressed about the changes in my body. And that links to her thoughts. So my thighs look disgusting. I'm sure I have cellulite too. None of my clothes will fit me. My partner will think I'm gross. To what she sees and feels, that my body looks huge in the mirror. I can see my body fat spreading out when I sit down. And what she does, so she covers herself up so that others can't see me, and I avoid my partner and I avoid my friends. So all of these things fit together and keep the difficulties going. So when we think about people who have an eating disorder, not everyone with an eating disorder will have body image disturbance. And even in those who have kind of negative body image, there will be differences in the way that it's expressed. So this picture here shows perhaps the classic image of the individual seeing a grossly distorted view of their body. And that can lead to lots of arguments in families, and lots of, but you're not that, but yes, I am. So that often creates lots of tension. We also have dissatisfaction. So the individual may have quite an accurate view of how they look, but they're really dissatisfied with what they see. And we also have a fear of fatness, where the individual is petrified that the body is going to go out of control and that they will become overweight. And often one of the most difficult things when we do body image work is people might say, actually, I do know that I'm underweight and I do know that it's not good for me, but I'm so frightened of starting to put on weight because what if I start and I can't stop and my weight just spirals out of control? So it can be a huge fear that really gets people stuck. I also just wanted to put these definitions up because I think they really help us to think about body image. So first of all, we've got evaluation. So this is kind of how satisfied or dissatisfied you are with your body. But what's really important is the idea of body image investment. So how important is your appearance in how you judge yourself? For some people, it's not that important. And so therefore, their evaluation of themselves carries less weight. But if you are someone who bases almost all of their sense of how they are as a person on your appearance, that's going to create a huge discrepancy or huge dissatisfaction if there's a discrepancy between your ideal self, which might be up here, and your perceived self, so how you see yourself. So often people with eating disorders will have huge investment into their appearance. And that's not about saying that someone's vain, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on, but it's saying that for some reason that's become the central method for them to evaluate themselves and their self-worth. I'm going to touch briefly on social media just because it's everywhere. And my sense is that often it's something that gets a bit overlooked or not talked about when we come to body image, but it has such a profound impact. So we all know that there are things like websites where you can load up a picture and get people to tell you if you're ugly or not. We know that there are things like apps that will help you monitor your fitness. There are things like Instagram. When my patients come and see me, I am shocked by how IT savvy they are. And I'll have some people that say every single picture that goes on Facebook is photoshopped. You know, so everything is altered and to give our best impression of ourselves. So I think from the video that Paul showed just now, we're aware that, you know, what we see in magazines and what we see on TV has been altered. But I think we also need to remember that actually lots of other things have been altered. And perhaps when we compare ourselves to celebrities, we can kind of say, well, it's a celebrity and they had hair and makeup and they had this and that. But if we're looking at Facebook and we're looking at our friends and going, wow, they look amazing, and they've got X number of likes for their picture, that again is feeding into our own insecurity about ourselves. So I think social media often leads us to kind of expect perfection and also to compare ourselves to peers. And one of the things we did where I work is develop this booklet with some of the people that we work with, which is really just thinking about how can you use social media in a way that's helpful for you. So it's here if anyone wants to look at it. But I think the key message is it's not that social media per se is bad, it's how you use it. And we're not going to stop people using social media or ban it. But maybe you need to think about agreeing limits, thinking with yourself about what do I use, how do I use it. Maybe there are some apps on there that I should take off. Can I follow it in a different way? So funny or inspirational people. And what we'd always recommend is kind of thinking about setting up an experiment. So try changing how you use social media and think about your anxiety levels, your levels of body dissatisfaction and your mood. So does that actually improve if you're not using some of these sites? So often when people come to me, or even actually just out in general life, there are so many myths that we hear about body image. So I think one of the big ones that we hear is, with hard work you can achieve anything. And we see all these celebrities that, you know, they're a bit overweight, they release a diet video, they lose the weight, they release a diet video, then they gain the weight again. But it is this real message that we should all be able to do it. But actually to have some dissatisfaction about your body is really normal. To be completely satisfied or to have the perfect body is unrealistic. And we almost live in a society where we kind of call that normative discontent, because so many people, particularly women, do have some dissatisfaction about their bodies. For people who have to gain weight as part of their recovery, there's a big myth: I should feel okay about my body when I get to a healthy weight. So I think a lot of the time we as professionals say you just need to get to a healthy weight and then all your thinking will improve and everything will be okay. And that's not true for everyone. It can take time to adjust to your new shape. And in my experience, that's often around about a year. And the other myth that I often hear from my patients is, I can judge my weight based on how I feel. So people make this real link between their emotions and their weight. And that link is actually not going to hold out. So if you try and predict the small changes in your weight, you can't do it. And there have been several studies that have kind of tested that out. But it's a really powerful thing, isn't it? Because if I feel that I've gained weight, then I'm worried that I'm going out of control and I need to try and do something to get that control back. So I go back to my restriction or back to whatever else I've been doing. So what I'm going to do now is talk through a little bit about what we might do with treatment. So what are we actually trying to achieve? Broadly, as I've kind of said, acceptance, not satisfaction. And one of the things that we do is we try and alter people's perspective and their values about their bodies. So we're not going to try and change someone's body, we need to change your relationship with your body. So we might try and change some of the behaviours that might be maintaining the negative or disturbed body image, and I'll say a bit more about those in a moment. And building on from this morning's talk, what we try and do is build a compassionate rather than a critical approach to one's body. So you could see that a bit in the video that we saw as well, how important it is to step out of that self-critical attacking role and move into a compassionate role. And a lot of the things that we say to ourselves about our bodies, we wouldn't dream of saying to anyone else. And we also want to support the individual to maintain a stable and healthy weight. So learning how to live life at a healthy weight, not with weight going up or weight coming down. So I saw that Paul was doing the keynote speech this morning, so I obviously didn't want to say too much because he's the expert. But in terms of thinking about self-compassion, this is kind of, I guess, one of the overarching principles that we're thinking about the whole way through treatment. So how can we help you develop compassion to your body? And shame and self-criticism are such common features in negative body image. But developing compassion is a core skill to be able to change your relationship with your body. And this is what one of my patients said. And I thought it was such a lovely quote. So when I'm able to speak compassionately to myself, thoughts of needing to magically make myself a better person or lose weight go. And that's really what we're working towards. So again, thinking about some of the things that we would be doing would be developing that ideal nurturer, like in the little video just now, or maybe for other people having a safe place where they can go to. And it's useful doing this at the beginning so that when anxiety or distress increases as we address body image, the individual's got somewhere where they can go. We do a lot of work about thinking about how you treat your body compassionately, and that might include some mindfulness. And often one of the questions that I'll ask the people I'm working with is, who do you know who treats themselves and their body compassionately? What do you notice? What's different about them? And a lot of my patients who are young women in their 20s and 30s can say, yes, I've got some friends who are really, really critical and I notice they do this, this and this, and some friends who are really compassionate, and so they can see the difference. But we also use a lot of CBT when we come to address body image. And CBT in a nutshell is thinking about it's the thought that counts. So it's less about what we look like, but more about that idea of how we judge it and our investment in it, so how important it is to us. So, okay, right. So what we do a lot of in our treatment is firstly some psychoeducation. Then we think about that idea of alternative perspectives, and then we'd move on to the CBT and the compassion. As you saw earlier, we have a lot of myths about body image and our expectations, and we can do a lot of psychoeducation about what we should expect. So just trying to provide people some information to correct some of those beliefs. So, you know, the fact that we need fat for normal, healthy biological functioning, the fact that a lot of people actually don't feel entirely satisfied with their bodies, and thinking about changes in media and so on. But when I start working with someone, often what I'll do is think with them about how my body image developed. So, and this is an exercise that we'll probably do in a session. So I'll get them to think about at each stage in your life, what did you look like? What was happening? What were the major influences on how you felt about your looks? And so we'll kind of say a bit about what was going on, how they felt about their body, and what might be the influential events and experiences. And so we might do that in early childhood, then maybe 8 to puberty, early and late adolescence, and working up to however old the individual is now. And it's really interesting because a lot of people will be able to go back to a time where they felt okay about their bodies. And then we think, well, what changed? What made that different for you? And what was it like, that experience of feeling okay about your body? You know, did you worry about your weight? Did you worry about your shape? Did you worry about what you ate? And so that's a really good starting point for people. And so we either might do it in this way, or we might use a guided imagery approach. So I might get the individual in the session to close their eyes, and I'll talk them through, you know, thinking back to a time when you weren't self-conscious about your looks. What were you thinking, feeling, wearing? And we might also, in later sessions, build that up to the future as well. So what would that be like again? So what would it be like if you weren't worrying about your looks, your appearance, your shape? How would life feel like to you? In this society, there's a real focus on the thin ideal. And we'll often do quite a lot of exploring of that. So what are the pros and cons of buying into the thin ideal? And who benefits from the thin ideal? So it's the people trying to sell us things, the beauty, fashion, cosmetic, diet industries, gym industries, media. Again, asking people, you know, if you've been on a diet, does it work? Why do magazines have a new diet every week? Because generally they don't work. But also, do we notice the subtle messages out there? So actually, when we watch TV, when we look at newsreaders, you know, who do we see? What are we picking up on? What messages do we get? So we might think about challenging someone's belief about needing to look perfect. So what are the pros of this belief? What are the cons of this belief? So, you know, one day I might look perfect. For some people, it might help me to get a job if I feel that, you know, being successful in my career is predicated on how I look. People might like me more. But the cons of this belief takes a lot of time that I could be spending with my friends. It's expensive, you know, buying all this new makeup, all these new products, or always having to try the latest thing. It's stressful. And I'm never happy. So no matter how much effort I put into this, I'm seeking this kind of unattainable goal. Just going to, because we're going to about 20 past 12, so I'm just going to skip a couple. Okay. So thinking about building compassion. So as you picked up, this is something that we think is really important. And one of the ways that we do this is through letter writing. And I will get people to write a lot of different letters throughout the course of their therapy. And that also means you've kind of got a bit of a journal of your therapy. So what I might say to someone is actually take 10 minutes to write a letter from your body to you. Allow your body to express the way it feels about how you treat it. When you've written that letter, just take some time to think about it. How do you feel? Then write a kind and compassionate letter back to your body, explaining how you intend to treat it in the future. In particular, think about what your body does for you and the parts that you do like. So here's an example. Dear Jenny, I've always felt that I've let you down, that I'm not good enough for you. For the last 14 years, I've always been starved and not able to operate at my best. Yet you have kept me in the gym, pounding away until my joints ached. I'm beginning to decay. I can't have children and my bones are weakening, yet this is still not enough. All these years I've carried you through, kept you alive and enabled you to do all these amazing things. You neglect me and often insist on keeping me cold just to burn off more calories. And often when we put it like that, it's very similar to the two-chair technique. It gives you a chance to step back and really reflect on what's going on. So dear body, thank you for your letter. I had not thought before about all that you do for me. You keep me alive, you keep me breathing, you enable me to share hugs and affection. You get me to the places I need to be so that I can do the things I want to do. I realise that I've been too focused on the numbers on the scale, rather than appreciating all the other things you can do for me. I've been critical and punishing towards you when you haven't done anything wrong. I realise that I have inflicted a lot of damage on you, although as I have begun to eat more healthily and regularly, hopefully some of this will be reversed. I have already noticed that my skin is becoming less dry and my hair is in better condition. In the future, I will try and treat you more kindly, to eat normally and to cut back on my excessive exercise. As again, you would use these letters whether you were thinking about shape or weight or size or appearance, whether you were someone who was a normal weight, overweight or underweight. And so what we need to do is start noticing those changes. So record the changes that fit with the newer compassionate approach. How are you treating your body differently? Okay. So the other thing that we think about, so I've spoken about investment and how your appearance or your weight or shape becomes the most important way that you judge yourself. And sometimes for people, especially if you had an eating disorder for a long time, eating disorder or being a certain weight can become a central focus of your identity. So someone might say, I don't know who I would be without my eating disorder. Or I'm known as the one that's ill or the one that needs looking after or the ill one. I don't want to lose that part of my identity. So to kind of start thinking about this, we'll use the pie chart exercise. And so I will get someone to think about what are the parts of yourself that you value. So what, if it's going well, make you feel good about your life, make you feel good about yourself. And then what I want you to try and do is take all those parts and put them into a pie chart. So allocate how important, or not how important, how much of an impact that has in how you value yourself. And so this may often be the kind of pie chart that we see. So the red part of the pie is being thin. So for this person, being thin is a really, really important part of how they see themselves. And if that's not going so well, it has a huge impact. They're kind of at university. That's important, a little bit. Friends are a little bit, and they've recently become an auntie. So that's quite important to them as well. But if we look at this pie chart, I think we can be struck by how big that red bit is. And so we might kind of think about, is this how you want your pie chart to look? There are actually only 4 things on that pie chart. Are there things that you'd like to be on your pie chart that aren't? And how does anorexia help you meet your other interests or values? So does having anorexia or bulimia or binge eating disorder, how does that help you be the auntie that you want to be? How is it helping you with university? And what we might find out is that actually those domains are in direct competition, because having the eating disorder or having that focus on being thin all the time means that you can't relax around your niece or nephew. It means that you can't study in the way that you'd like to. And perhaps actually you can't be relaxed with friends, partly because maybe you don't feel you're being honest with them, or maybe because a lot of socialising in life is around eating and drinking, and that's something that you find hugely anxiety-provoking. And the other thing that we think about when we look at that pie chart is, have you got all your eggs in one basket? Because if you don't feel good about that red bit, you're not feeling very good about much of life. So I'll often compare this to maybe someone who's a workaholic. What happens if they suddenly get made redundant? They've lost the major focus of how they value themselves as a person. And so often when you have an eating disorder and people are trying to help you move away from that eating disorder, you can feel like you're going to lose a huge part of yourself. And if we don't have anything to put in that void, it's going to make it very easy for the eating disorder to come back. So we get people to think about, how would you like your pie chart to look? And you can see how different this pie chart is. So we've changed being thin to looking after my body. So people might still have quite a lot of thoughts about needing to stay in control of their body or needing to have a healthy body. So it's still on the pie chart. And actually, if we think about all of us here, probably lots of us, if we were to do our own pie chart, would have kind of how we look on it as part of how we appraise ourselves. But we've also got some new things that have come back in. So this person is saying, you know what, actually, I'd like to go back on my hockey team because I've had to give that up. Or actually, now that I'm in recovery, it's really important that my well-being is something that I think about, my emotional well-being. And actually, you know what, I've always been really inspired by green issues, and so I want to have that back there. You know, I want to be able to do these things. So, if we move on now and think about how do we actually change behaviours. So in common with BDD, there will be lots of behaviours going on that all serve to maintain anxiety and distress around the body. So these can be things like checking, comparing yourselves to other people, scrutinising, seeking reassurance, and avoidance. So avoidance might be avoiding social occasions, it might be wearing baggy clothes, or wearing things that cover up the bits of yourself that you feel particularly anxious about. And body checking is something that happens particularly often in the eating disorders. So this will be things like monitoring the gap between your thighs, studying specific body parts in the mirror, measuring certain parts of your body. And people do this a lot. And what we actually know is that it's not a very accurate way of measuring change. And when you talk to people about it, they will say that actually it ends up making me more anxious. So people believe that it's helpful and it helps them feel in control, but actually, paradoxically, it just increases that. So one of the things that we might use to kind of help someone with this is what we call behavioural experiments. So this is where, with your therapist, you set up a situation of, okay, I'm going to change my behaviour and monitor the outcome. So what's going to happen? So I'm not going to go into this in too much detail, but this is someone who said, you know, actually, if I check the gap between my thighs, I can work out if I've gained weight or not, and then I know if I need to eat more or less the next day. And so actually what we've got her to do for a week is just think about, let me measure that gap between my thighs, we'll get my weight, and then we'll see what happens. And what she found was that there was no relationship between what she thought was happening with her thighs and actually what was happening with her weight. And so when we work on things like body image, as well as bringing in that compassionate approach, what we also want to do is try and break some of these behaviours that actually keep things in quite an unhealthy position. Okay. So the other thing that many people will say, and not even people with eating disorders necessarily, is I'm feeling fat. But you can't feel fat any more than you can have blue eyes or feel that you're orange today. Being fat isn't a feeling. But if you were to say this to someone, they would say, but it's so strong. I can feel myself physically growing in the chair. So what's happening? What's going on? Often we find that saying I feel fat can become a bit of an unconscious smokescreen. So what often happens is that we have a feeling and it's usually negative. And sometimes we're not very good at working out our feelings. They feel like a big grey mess. And obviously it's uncomfortable to have negative feelings. We don't want them. So because we can't work it out, we tend to project it onto our appearance. And we kind of almost go through our head really quickly. I feel rubbish. I feel fat. And what we think about that is we are mislabeling our emotions. Okay. And the difficulty with this is it stops us attending to what the initial problem or concern was, and actually just keeps our focus on the body and the diet. So you might then feel, gosh, I need to do something, miss my next meal or do something else. And you don't go back and think, I wonder why I felt like that in the first place. So often something that we'll work on is kind of noticing that feeling and getting people to think about what else might be going on. So, and this is something that one of my patients said to me, is that actually if I feel fat, that stands for find another thought. So it's just about thinking, take a step back, what's going on? Okay. So, talked a lot about compassion today. And one of the things that can be really helpful is thinking about these awful self-critical thoughts and how do I replace them with a compassionate thought. Now, at first, this is going to take a lot of practice. For example, I look fat. And the compassionate thought is, I've been feeding myself. This is part of the plan. This is weight gain and what getting healthy looked like. I'm disgusting. I can't be this size. If I feel this is okay for other people, then it's okay for me. Why do I have such strong rules for myself? I look ugly. I'm not happy with how I look, but that doesn't mean I'm ugly. I judge myself as a whole person, thinking about my kindness and my bravery in recovery. So some of you might remember this advert. It was from The Body Shop quite a long time ago. There are 3 billion women who don't look like supermodels and only 8 who do. So, and this was part of their campaign in terms of thinking about advertising in the media. But we know that all of these things are really entrenched. We see this every day. So this is Kate Winslet, who was really substantially photoshopped for the picture on the right, to the extent that she complained. And unfortunately, this doesn't only happen to women. This is Andy Roddick, who at one point was a top 10 tennis player, and this is him more normally, and this is him on the cover of Men's Fitness, where he obviously had to have his pecs and his abs built up, because even though he's an international sports star, he wasn't good enough the way that he looked already. So it's really important thinking about all these messages that we get. And just a couple of other things that people might well have seen, but they're available on YouTube. So there's a good film called Onslaught and one called Evolution, and also a TED Talk that's really interesting to watch. So generally what we would do is use what I've talked about with people across the weight spectrum. But I think if we are working with an individual who's obese and has an eating disorder, what we need to hold on to and acknowledge is the stigma that is out there. And that's very real, I think, that stigma. And you know, from a really young age, we all get lots of messages like thin is good, beautiful, powerful, fat is ugly or out of control. And most of all, we get the message that your appearance is the most important thing about you. And so actually, we need to be able to help people take a step back. And again, going back to the idea of pie charts, judge yourself on a broad range of aspects, not just yourself. And to highlight that actually, this kind of stigma or weightism is a form of discrimination. And it can be practiced to us, but it can also be practiced by us. So we go back to that idea of the self-critical bully. And it's really easy for all of us to activate that, but we do need to think about when that's happening. Okay. So, right. So, positive body image. This is really important because it's not just not having negative body image, it's something different. And what we know is that people who have a positive body image have better mood, better friendships, feel happier about lots of different things. And it's really about looking after yourself well. So one of the things that I'll talk to people about is actually, can you do some research on positive body image? You know, have a look on the internet, what's out there. what affirmations or pictures, photos can inspire you. This is taken from an advert that was on TV last year. Some of you might remember it. So by BBC Sport. One thing that we know is that a lot of young girls are too embarrassed, and women too embarrassed to exercise because of how their body looks. And this advert was about trying to get women to engage in exercise, whatever their size. And again, ask what you can do differently and how do people you admire behave. Okay, so I'm nearly at the end of my slides. What can I do? So if you were going to go away from today and think about what could I start doing? So thinking about, how do I respect myself and look after myself? How do you treat your body? Can you catch yourself when you say something critical to it? And would you ever talk to a friend like that? Focus on what your body can do, not how it looks. So what are all the amazing things that you've done in life, whether it's, being able to go travelling, run for the bus in the morning, have a baby, all of the things that you do that your body does for you. So instead of thinking about my body as something that I must judge as a number, how do I think about it as something that gives me a much bigger life than that? And again, while people with eating disorders might have problems with exercise, and I'm not advocating that anyone who's significantly underweight exercises, if we think about things like team sports or classes like yoga where the focus isn't on appearance, they can be a really helpful way of using your body in a different way. And also being with other people and understanding how they see their body. Look for real role models, and I've just put a couple of things up which are kind of areas that look into this. And then think about how your values fit with this. So if you went back to your pie chart, how can you develop perspective? What really matters when you're thinking about your life in the bigger picture? And sometimes we say to people, what would you want on your tombstone? And if you want, I was thin, or is there actually something else that you want on there? Right, so thank you very much, everyone. I had some questions. Okay, so I'll just read them out and then I can give my answer and then we'll take any questions from the floor. Is that okay? So, is self-harming and subsequent severe scarring on a body related to body hatred or just a means of release, or both? Okay, so I think actually both. So self-harm can serve many, many functions. It can serve the function of feeling that my emotions are so overwhelming, this is the only way that I can cope. But it can also serve the function of punishment. And particularly if our bodies are something that we really hate, I will often hear people talking about maybe self-harming on areas like the thighs or the stomach, so the bits that they feel are particularly fat and they're particularly unhappy with. So my answer to that would be both. And when you're thinking about how you try and cut down or stop your self-harm, actually what's going to be really important is understanding why you're doing it so that you can find another way of coping with it. My daughter has a preoccupation with shape, colour of eyebrows, and she will overpluck them and cause bleeding, etc. Is this another distraction or release? Yes, again. And again, in terms of BDD, we can get very focused on certain areas of the body, and then it becomes a kind of a repetitive behaviour. And often what's very difficult is the more obsessed we are with it, the worse we make it, and the more of a problem it becomes. And again, it's interesting how these things go through trends, because I think eyebrows weren't that big a deal 10 years ago, but now eyebrows are a lot about what people talk about. So things will move around. And I mean, you saw the example of the feet being bound, over cultures and generations, the bits that people focus on have changed. Okay. So my daughter overeats, never makes healthy eating choices, even though she knows healthy alternatives. Why? Okay. All right. Oh, and that then feeds into body hatred. So almost if you are really unhappy with your body in the first place, but then you know that you're making unhealthy choices and kind of in a way increasing your distress, why do people do that? So again, what's important to say is that eating disorders and BDD are really severe mental illnesses, and they do have really high levels of anxiety and distress for people. And I think all of us know this if we've ever tried to change any of our behaviours, that we might know logically what we need to do, but it's really really difficult to be able to put that into action. And that's often where therapy comes in, because you need the support of a clinician to be able to help that person make those first steps. One of the things that we know is that living with someone with an eating disorder can be really stressful, because we all want the best for our loved ones and we can see they're doing something that's self-destructive and damaging. And sometimes that can lead us to respond with irritation or anger, or to kind of put our heads in the sand and walk away from it because it's too difficult to bear. And so actually having that therapist who is a step removed and can support you and your loved one in making those changes is going to be the more helpful way of doing it. So those are the questions on, yeah, let's go.
I was wondering how you handle not just the kind of perceptual problems of body image that attend to having an eating disorder, but also the very real bodily effects. So for example, with me, I've been very, very overweight and very, very underweight throughout my life, and I'd actually cycled through binge eating through both states. And that has left me with a body that shows the marks of that experience, loose skin, stretch marks, things like that. So whilst I might be able to kind of let go of some of the other concerns I have about my ugliness or, perception or otherwise, what's the treatment for kind of living with the realities of that? Mm-hmm.
So the question really is, how do we live with the realities of some of the damage that we might have done to our bodies through kind of rapid weight cycling or anything else? And I think that's a really good question, and I think that there aren't kind of magic answers. Sometimes I've heard of people who've been referred for skin removal, things like that, in cases where it's really severe. But I think it is perhaps about that, taking that step back and working on the compassion to yourself and your body and acknowledging what you've been through. And that's not easy at all, but I think that's the way forward. And it was interesting, I think the first inspirational speaker said at the end what she'd learned from her experiences, and that had helped her build empathy and so on. And that's sometimes what I think these experiences are, that we need to learn to tolerate the bits that are still not okay, and in some cases maybe be worse or really, really quite difficult, but actually taking that step back and thinking about the bigger picture. Thank you.
I suppose I wanted to just ask how you help people. It seems to me that bodies are kind of out in the world and they're sort of ripe for comment, and one of the difficulties of kind of managing recovery might be kind of dealing with other people's reactions to your body, whether that's if you lose weight then receiving a positive reaction which could act as a trigger, or whether that's gaining weight to become healthier but then feeling other people maybe commenting on that, or whether it's feeling yourself like you've gained weight but other people saying, oh no you haven't, I don't know what you're worried about or something. And there's a lot of kind of scope for other people making things more difficult, and I don't know how you sort of deal with that.
So the question is broadly, how do you deal with comments, whether they're kind of about the body, especially as you're moving through change?
Kind of people's reactions to that.
And I think you're really right. That it can be really difficult and challenging. And we also know that people often can say well-intentioned things. And one of the things that a lot of my patients will say to me is someone says, you look well, and it absolutely crucifies them. So, and we can't inoculate against that. We can't get to a point where we can make everybody else in the world not say anything. Because sometimes if people don't say things, then people think, but I've gained weight and no one say anything. So there's a no-win situation. So what we do is we talk about how do you inoculate yourself to those comments. So we know they're going to happen, but how do you give yourself the time to just step back and say, well, you know, we talked about this last week in therapy. We know that people are beginning to notice that I've gained weight, or, you know, that kind of thing. And actually, this is what I expected. And perhaps recognising that it might cause an upsurge in anxiety, but we've just got to tolerate that and stick with the plan.
So just on that, as a carer, is it a good thing to respond to improvements, if you like, or is it best not to?
Everyone's individual. So my advice actually would be to talk to your loved one. And normally what I say is actually what's quite useful is to set aside a time every week where we're just going to talk about this. So I'm not going to suddenly throw in a comment on Monday evening when you're not expecting it, but actually sit down and talk and say, how is it helpful for me to say this? You know, I want to tell you that I can see you're working hard, you know, and that's different from saying you're looking well, but mostly it's about having that conversation with the person concerned about what's going to be the best way for me to say this to you, because everyone is different and different things will trigger different people. But actually, and then giving them permission to say, you know, when you say X, I really hate it, but if you put it this way, that would be much better. So I'm just going to take that one there, sorry.
So I noticed you used a picture of someone with anorexia, and this is something that you see a lot in magazines. So there's always a story about an eating disorder or someone with anorexia, and it's plastered with pictures of them being underweight.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that's very damaging for someone with an eating disorder, because that's something for them to compare themselves
Yeah.
to. So I was just wondering how much you thought the media using these pictures of very emaciated women, which excludes bulimia, binge eating disorder, how much do you think that actually can feed into these body image kind of problems?
Mm-hmm. I guess that's an interesting question, because I think we know that comparing is something that we all do, but particularly if you have an eating disorder, you might be particularly drawn to it and particularly focusing on it. I guess in a way, my answer might be similar to just now, that I think that magazines and media are always going to use these kinds of images, that we can see them everywhere, and we maybe have to work on how we can inoculate ourselves against them and how we attend to them in a different way. Because I think it's really difficult. Some magazines will use them as a kind of before and after, and someone will want to say this was my recovery and it's really positive. But if you're in the grips of an eating disorder, you're only going to see it in that way. So I think because we're not going to be able to change that, it's how do I manage it? But I can see your point very well, that if someone is in a really difficult place, that's going to be something that they compare to. And again, when, particularly in the case of anorexia, things like weights are mentioned, again, that just gets the brain going, doesn't it? And all the thoughts and all the shame and self-attack.
So it's changing the behavioural responses to seeing those images and trying to stop them from going to those images.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was Paul just put up there, didn't he, about the thing about how can we change advertising and media. So there would be a great thing if we as a whole culture could change lots of things about the way that we talk about these things, kind of stigma around mental illness, the way that things get reported. But I think in the short term, actually, how can you work on your response to it? And the same as with the comments, can I just give myself 30 seconds out to go, okay, what's my reaction to this? What's being triggered? And what can I do differently? How can I be kind to myself and not let this disturb my whole day? Any other questions? Okay, thank you all very much for coming today.